Well, my eyesight hasn't got any better during COVID, so I'm going to take my glasses off to read this. But ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, a very warm welcome to this evening's meeting of the Cardiff Business Club. I don't know about you, but it still feels a little surreal to be in a largest gathering. I've been to a couple of events now over the last couple of weeks, and it's been fantastic to see people bumping into old, kind of colleagues and contacts, and they haven't seen each other for 2 years, and I'm sure that's probably been the case tonight. And I also hope that the club can really come into its own, because that's what we're about, is bringing a wide cross section of Welsh society together, and hopefully reset some of those relationships, and hopefully return a little bit, can we say, to some sort of normal. But it is all great to see you all here this evening, and we really appreciate you coming. So turning to this evening, I would like to extend a particularly warm welcome to representatives across the armed forces. And I guess possibly there's sort of no clearer time to recognise the crucial role that you play within society right now. My particular thank goes to the Reserve Forces and Cadets Association for Wales for their continued support in securing such high-profile speakers for our programme, and of course also sponsoring this evening's event. Just a quick reminder of what the RFCA for Wales does. It's an arm's length body of the Ministry of Defence. It was established by an Act of Parliament to be an essential pillar in the delivery of a range of support services to reserves and cadets in Wales. As well as a professional secretariat based in Cardiff and Mold, and a full-time support staff, the organisation largely comprises a body of volunteer members, and many of whom are sat here with us this evening, and who are drawn from all strata of society across Wales. The RFCA supports around 2,200 reservists in Wales, with opportunities to enhance their everyday lives through adventurous and challenging experiences, along with promoting their transferable skills to civilian employers on behalf of Defence in Wales. And RFCA also provides advice and support on behalf of the volunteer reserve forces and cadets in Wales. And importantly, they work with the chains of command of the 3 services to deliver this support. They also build, maintain and invest in the reserves and cadet estate for work and training purposes, and also renovate houses of injured service personnel, whilst collaborating with the third sector to provide further support. And through its extensive network, which it really does have, the RFCA for Wales facilitates an understanding between the military and civilian communities to develop strong working relationships. So it's my absolute pleasure to introduce the chair of RFCA, Brigadier Russ Wardle, who, following a distinguished military career, seeing active service worldwide, Russ has become Honorary Colonel for the 3rd Battalion of the Royal Welsh, Honorary Colonel Dublin and Glamorgan Army Cadet Forces, a trustee of the Royal Welsh Regimental Museum, and is also a Deputy Lieutenant of Gwent. So, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Brigadier Russ Wardle, who will now introduce this evening's speaker. Russ.
I suspect we're going to go through the evening sort of repeating each other's comments, so I'll try not to do so better. Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. It's my great pleasure and privilege to be able to introduce our guest speaker tonight. But within the 4 minutes that Scott and Paul so generously allow me, it would be remiss of me not to say something about the RFCA. Scott has already done quite a bit of the introductions, which is helpful. As you've heard, RFCA are the Reserve Forces and Cadets Association, and we're the enabling body for reserves and cadets in Wales. Tonight, I want to focus briefly on the RF, Reserve Forces, part of our title. Reservists are an integral and vital part of UK national defence, both for civil emergencies and as part of our warfighting capability in support of national and international treaties and coalitions. Now, I suspect most of you have benefited from the NHS COVID vaccination programme, which was strongly supported by regular and reserve personnel. And anyone watching the news from Ukraine will not need me to explain what a reservist commitment could mean in the most extreme of circumstances. So I'd like to ask you, and particularly the employers among you, whether you have a policy, written or not, for how you deal with employing reservists. Do you encourage it? Do you allow them time to complete the modest training commitment required of them? Do you recognise the benefits that you can accrue from employing reservists? Whatever your answer to those questions, have you considered signing the Armed Forces Covenant, which is a pledge to treat those who serve or have served and their families fairly? If you want to know more about any of that, please speak to any of my team here this evening or drop us a message and we'll get back in touch. Now to the main event. We always get a great turnout for our sponsored event, and I like to think it's because we have access to amazing and inspirational speakers, and tonight is no exception. And it's my great privilege to introduce Rear Admiral Jude Terry, OBE, the most senior serving female officer in the Royal Navy. Rear Admiral Terry grew up and still has a home in Jersey. She's a fan of the beach, the cliffs and water sports, so perhaps it was no real surprise when she joined the Royal Navy in September 1997, having graduated from Dundee University with a degree in anatomical sciences. Since then, she's benefited from the varied career afforded by the armed forces that has seen her alternate between shore-based staff roles and sea-going appointments. Operational roles have included logistics officer on board HMS Scott and HMS Ocean, where she was lucky enough to deploy to the Indian Ocean, the Arabian Gulf, the Caribbean, and the Far East. And I know that all sounds splendid, but I do stress that these were operational deployments. Her potential was obviously recognised early, and as a commander, she was military assistant to the Chief of Joint Operations in the UK's Senior Operational Headquarters, Permanent Joint Headquarters. She joined HMS Ocean as Commander Logistics in April 2016 and spent 10 of the next 12 months at sea. She was also the media officer responsible for Warship, the Channel 4 documentary that many of you will have seen. The next role was at Naval Command Headquarters as Logistics Branch Manager, where she dealt with issues such as Royal Navy Welfare Service and the Navy approach to tattoos. Now, excuse me for thinking that I thought all sailors, it was compulsory to be tattooed. What do I know? On promotion to captain, she served at Standing Joint Force Headquarters as the Assistant Chief of Staff for Support and Central Staff, and she attended the prestigious Higher Commander Staff course. She then had roles involved with Navy Command's support to the COVID pandemic and was involved in delivering the integrated review and in-year and annual budgetary cycles. As a Commodore, she was Deputy Director People in Navy Command Headquarters and was then promoted to Rear Admiral. And in January this year, she assumed her current role as Director People in Training and as Naval Secretary. Rear Admiral Terry's experiences, particularly in people and logistics issues, will undoubtedly have huge relevance to all of us in the business community. And I'm sure you're as eager as I am to hear what she has to tell us tonight. So please join me in welcoming Rear Admiral Jude Terry.
So it's always quite interesting when someone reads back to you what your career is and you have no idea who they're talking about. Scott, Russ, thank you very much for the welcome. I want to say what an absolute honour and privilege it is to be back in Cardiff. I have some amazing memories of Cardiff Bay, Cardiff University, which my sister attended, and the Millennium Stadium, or is it the Principality Stadium? So I might have just shown my age. I have also less fond memories of my first Cardiff half marathon. If I say to you cobbles, bleeding feet, and not being able to walk for a couple of days, that's probably all you need to know in this auspicious centre, but I'm really happy to talk about it. I did, however, come back and do another Cardiff half marathon, and I really enjoyed that. Taking the cobbles out from the last bit was a really sensible idea. Excuse me. I would like to say a big thank you to the Reserve Forces and Cadets Association of Wales for sponsoring this event, for enabling me to be here tonight and for enabling me to talk to all of you. I'd also like to say thank you to the Cardiff Business Club. I'm not sure auspicious and inspirational might be what you get, but I'll be honest, so that might be what you want. I was asked to talk about whatever I wanted. I think that's quite dangerous. And I had a bit of a think, and I had a talk to the good Brigadier Fraser about what I actually should be talking about. And I also reflected on what the Cardiff Business Club is for. It looks to me like it's about developing connections, talking about networks, and sharing experiences and working out how we can do things better, differently together. I also had a look at where we are. And this is all about the Navy in Wales. Therefore, you'll be pleased to hear I have narrowed it down a bit, and I will be talking to you about my role, my career, and my career in relation to the Royal Navy today, and more importantly, the Royal Navy of the future, which my job as Director, People and Training and the Naval Secretary is all about. I have to secure our workforce for now, for the future, and for what the world might look like beyond 2040, because I'm probably about to recruit the future commanding officer of 2040. I'm really conscious that the question and answer session is probably where most people will enjoy the session more. And so I will try and keep my brief as succinct as possible. I will also promise you that any questions you ask me, I will aim to answer as honestly as possible. And I will be truthful, and you might get the Jude view of the world, preferably without swearing, which we have discussed earlier. So broadly, what does my role mean? Director, People, Training and Naval Secretary. Well, it's a heck of a mouthful for a start. What it broadly means is I am responsible for everything from the recruiting and attraction of people into the Navy, to the training of them in order to get them through their first phase training, through their phase 2 training, and then to develop on to be professionals as they go through. Their employment, making sure they feel valued, part of a team, are able to get promoted or not. Welfare and lived experience, so I'm responsible for sport and adventurous training. I'm responsible for the chaplaincy. I'm responsible for the medical healthcare. I am also responsible for the welfare support that we provide to our sailors, Royal Marines, reservists and civil servants when things perhaps don't go according to plan. And ultimately, at the heart of that, what I'm also responsible for is their family. That is an area that we have not always been good at, but I am absolutely adamant we will do better. It's quite a lot in that. Our workforce consists of the civil service, the Royal Fleet Auxiliary, who some of you will know from your affiliation with Cardigan Bay, the regular military and reserves, which we have got great representation of today, university units, which we have a wonderful building in HMS Cambria, so thank you to all of those who supported that, and our contractors and business partners, you sat here today. I quite often find myself asking how I ended up stood here today. I'm not sure anybody would have believed the gobby 24-year-old who walked through the gates of Dartmouth would be stood here, least of all me. I have had an amazing career. I've joined the Navy and seen nearly all the world, and I am probably the epitome of born in Jersey and made in the Royal Navy. As you've heard, I joined as a logistics officer back in September 1997. When I joined, women had only been going to sea for 6 years. And they had been fully deployed in ships for 5 years. We now have branches and all our fighting arms are open to women throughout the service. That's a heck of a change in 24.5 years. And I am incredibly proud to be part of that. I know Russ commented on my anatomical sciences degree. I'm not quite sure what relevance that has to being a logistics officer. But I think what it does say is that anybody can join the Navy. The degree was all about just proving you could study something and stick something through to the end. My early career saw me employed in jobs in Faslane, Gosport, Northwood, Navy Command Headquarters. All my sea jobs have seen me linked to Wales. I was a logistics officer in HMS Scott. I got to organise an affiliated city visit to Swansea, and then I got off and someone else got to enjoy it. Apparently it was fabulous. In HMS Ocean, I've done 2 tours. The helicopter carrier, because she embarks amphibious troops, spent quite a lot of time off the coast of Wales at Castle Martin. So I have also spent a lot of time observing Wales from the other side of the sea. You provide us with a unique training environment, a unique family support, and I am incredibly grateful as Jude and as Director People and Training for what you give us. The second half of my career has seen me employed mainly in joint environments. And for those of you sitting in uniform or who have previously served in uniform, most of you will understand that's where the fun is to be had. Our single services are amazing, but actually working together is where you get most fun and most inspiration from the people you work with. I was lucky enough to do a year-long course at Shrivenham where they gave me an MA. I did do a bit of work for it. But I then went to Permanent Joint Headquarters, and I'd like to just paint a scene for you. So I turn up, Permanent Joint Headquarters, as the Navy officer on the desk responsible for Afghanistan. I have never done an operational tour in Afghanistan. I had never really been involved in any army units or any Royal Marines units. The general who was the Chief of Staff Operations, General Gordon Messenger, was not all that happy to see me when he came to see me with a question for the Prime Minister about how we were going to do the drawdown in Afghanistan. Luckily, I'd read that bit and I was able to give him the exactly what we were going to do, exactly what the numbers were and where we were going to go. I was responsible for drawing down the military capability from Herrick to Torrell in 2012 to 13. Not a job I ever would have imagined I would have done when I turned up at 24 as a logistics officer, planning to do 4 years, just because it might annoy my mum a little bit. As you've heard, I was also military assistant to the Chief of Joint Operations, where I was at the heart of the UK's operational output for 2 years. On duty 24/7, 365 for just over 2 years. I have some great stories about this time and some great experience. But for me, the best bit was travelling to connect with all our operational and deployed forces around the world, all of whom included contractors, civil servants, reservists and regular from all services. It was an absolute honour and a privilege. I've also got some interesting stories about Sierra Leone during the Ebola crisis and the north of Nigeria, getting stuck with your 3-star boss in a small camp with the army person who's only been out there 2 weeks. Didn't go down all that well. As you've heard, I was responsible for the branch manager. So the branch manager is allegedly your strategic workforce planning. I've got no idea how to do strategic workforce planning, but the reason I was put there was because we had a chef and a steward problem, which I'm sure most of you in this room will reflect if you are involved in the hospitality industry. We also had a problem with tattoos. So apparently you couldn't join the Navy with certain tattoos. You could join the Royal Marines because you could wear gloves on parade. But because the Navy didn't allow you to wear gloves, you weren't allowed to join with particular tattoos on your hands or in certain places. I found myself getting sent pictures of people who were MVQ level 5 chef qualified and having to agree that they could join the Navy because they might have had a tattoo. That is not a very modern fighting force in my view, and I spent quite a lot of time challenging that. I also have been involved in the COVID-19 response. And again, I am absolutely grateful to all of you for all your support to that, from our people, from providing accommodation, from looking after them. Most recently, providing the support to the North Wales Ambulance Service, which I know has been appreciated by most. I've never been one for a quiet life, which is probably just as well, because in this job, I am fundamentally responsible for changing how we do things. And I want to understand tonight where I can learn from you about how I can do better at managing our people, looking after them, managing their families, and learning about the changing world that we live in. COVID-19, I've had a chat with quite a few of you tonight, has given us real opportunities in terms of flexible working, being with family. How do I balance that with having to send people to sea under the water in a black tube, having to send them deployed for 6 months into an operating base, going away to sea for 7 months, as we did with Carrier Strike Group 21, and only managing to get ashore in 2 countries because of COVID-19. I genuinely am interested in any advice and support you can give me and any insights, because I know it's not a simple problem. Excuse me. I believe truly the Navy provides first-class training opportunities, and most of them, or lots of them, are in Wales, which is also a good reason to be here today. We also need to look at our warfighting and our softer skills and a huge range of activities about who you are and learning about yourself. That's really important. I remember having a discussion with a young operator maintainer on my first ship, where he was surprised how normal officers were. I'm not sure any of us like being described as normal, but I thought it was quite a good thing. My pitch to him was actually the Navy will allow you to be whoever you are, whatever you are, and to live to the best of your experience. I think I can probably testify to that, having got away with some gobbiness in my new entry. For us, as you know, our organisation is centred on teamwork and leadership. Taliban, here near the Usk, is where we have up to 10% of the service training in 1 year. They learn to develop their leadership skills, to work together and learn their strengths and weaknesses early on in their career and then come back. We also focus on professional proficiency, which is delivered here in Wales by RAF Valley, where we have got pilots and the support crew, and also HMS Cambria, where we are encompassing reservists, regulars, where we can base teams out of. My engagement team is based out of there, and where we can use the facility to the best of our ability. Thank you for providing such a fabulous opportunity for us to engage in Wales and to be part of something much bigger. My career in the Royal Navy has been incredibly broad and rewarding. I've visited places that I never would have done otherwise. Don't need to go back to some of them. I have met some amazing people who I've been able to learn from, and I've experienced things that many of my civilian counterparts would never dream of. I can stand before you and honestly say that I have loved every moment of it. And now is a fantastic time to be involved in the Royal Navy. I would do it all again. Hopefully, you've got a clear flavour of the Royal Navy in Wales and why being here tonight is so genuinely important to me and to our service. You in Wales are a critical element of our Navy. We couldn't achieve what we do without you. Approximately 7% of the Royal Navy and Royal Marines join from Wales. I think it's higher in Jersey because most of us run away, and with about 1,400 people registered as living in Wales, that means there are roughly 3 times more Navy service personnel per capita living in Wales than in England. That's not something you would necessarily think about. It is something I need to think about because it's where their families are, it's where their friends are, it's where home is. And I need to be able to work with you. And I would echo Russ's point about the covenant and how we work together to deliver more on that. I've touched on my personal links through HMS Scott, no run ashore in Swansea, and Castle Martin Ranges, watching Wales from the sea. We do have others, obviously. There's lots of lovely pictures of HMS Dragon with her fabulous red dragon on her prow. We also, HMS Cardiff, the Type 26, which is currently being built. I don't think that doesn't change any of our affiliations. And what it does is it means that we are definitely in this for the long haul. There is also Cardigan Bay, Express and Severn, who are also affiliated. And having visited at least 2 of those, I am very aware that they take their affiliation with Wales with them wherever they go. Being in the Royal Navy is not just about ships and training, thank goodness. It's about service, and it's about proudly showcasing it for the country and for our monarch, as the Senedd opening showed in October. I had the difficult job of trying to find some people to come and open the Senedd. Every person I spoke to afterwards, so what an amazing opportunity it was to be at the forefront doing something that nobody else wouldn't have ever been able to do, and they were genuinely proud to represent Wales and the country at that. We firmly believe the world needs a global, modern and ready and adaptable Navy. You wouldn't expect me to stand here and say anything else, would you? Luckily, having been in town for the integrated review, I can attest that the government thinks we do too. Global's pretty obvious. We are now having to put our units more far-reaching. There are threats around the globe. There are alliances around the globe, which we need to work hard to deliver and to develop. As we've discussed with some of you this evening, what is going on in Ukraine, that just brings it home to us how close things could be and what the issues are. And you will have seen, hopefully, some pictures of Prince of Wales leading the NATO task group and what that means. That's the largest task force established for the last 30 years. We're also looking, though, how do I manage the people within that balance? Because we can all stick lots of ships out there, but I spent 10 months out of 12 in HMS Ocean deployed. That ship had done the same for the last 4 years. That's a heck of a lot of time away from family and friends if you are one of those people on that ship. So how can I do that differently? In order to deliver our global ops, we're looking at different crewing options. There's some strengths and some weaknesses to all of them. HMS Montrose, permanently stationed in the Gulf. The way we make her permanently stationed in the Gulf is we rotate the crew round every 4.5 months. That means you are guaranteed to be off when you come back from your 4.5 months. That's perhaps not so good if you still don't want to spend 13.5 months out of 2 years deployed, but it is better than it was. Our batch 2 OPVs are deployed around the world. We've got one in the Caribbean. We've got one in Mediterranean, north coast of Africa. We've got one in the Falkland Islands, which is of course particularly important this year as we mark the 40th anniversary of that war. And we've got 2 currently out in the Indian, Asian, Pacific, visiting places that ships have not visited for about 40 years. How do we do that? Well, we rotate the crew through on a 3-watch basis. So there will always be 2 crews on each ship and you rotate them through. That comes with a bill and it comes with an interesting dynamic, but most of our sailors we find love them. One of the areas we're struggling to do things differently is air squadrons and the Royal Marines, because we tend to deploy Royal Marines as commando units. How can we get the best out of them when we're deploying them? And how can we help balance that work-life balance? All answers gratefully received on a postcard, please. We've also obviously got the CASD, the Continuous at Sea Deterrent, which is an integral part of who we are and what we do. And part of our focus in Navy Command is how we deliver the Vanguard to Dreadnought transition without breaking a sweat. Not as easy as it perhaps sounds. The future of the Navy is exciting. My job is to make sure we don't focus just on platforms, but on people. It's at the heart of everything we do. We need to embrace the ability of our team to innovate. Innovation doesn't come from tech, it comes from people who work out there's got to be a better way to do their job. We focus quite a lot on technology. Technology should be the thing that helps them to innovate and to deliver what they need to do. When I started my career, I never would have imagined I'd have been stood here tonight. It is an absolute honour and a privilege. I am absolutely delighted to be the Navy's head of people and training. I know I've got a huge responsibility. I have to deliver a sustainable workforce that helps us attract and retain the best. I'm looking forward to learning some lessons from you, answering some of your questions about how I can do it better. And I genuinely believe the flexible workforce model, including the reserves in this, including contractors, being clever about how we manage people, is how I'll do that. The 24.5 years I've passed in the blink of an eye. I think they do when you're having fun and you enjoy working with the people you work with. I'll stop now and I will pass over to Scott, who I think is going to be the demanding question master. Thank you very much for your time.
Well, as Judith said, she's going to welcome questions, going to try to be as honest as possible. You covered a lot of ground there, so I can't believe there won't be some really good burning questions. So what we're going to do, we've got some roving mics. So when you get the mic, please introduce yourself, say who you are and what your question is. We also have some people on Zoom, so we may well have some questions from there. So Paul's just going to let me know if we do, so we'll interlink between two. But we're going to start with the room. So are there any hands to start us off, please? Come on, there must be something out there. Oh, here we go.
You talked there about being responsible for recruiting the Navy of the future. Do you think that the idea of a combined recruiting process that all three services is actually feasible, will work?
So for the broader room, there is a project called the Armed Forces Recruiting Programme, which is looking at, could we combine how we recruit and attract people to make it better for defence as a whole rather than single services. Jude's view is I actually think there are lots of things we do that are similar, and we should probably be better at acknowledging them and understanding that the technology that we need, whether you are being recruited into the Navy or the Army or the Air Force, is actually pretty much the same technology. My apprehension is I think there is still a need for the people element of it, because you don't join a purple force, you join your own force. You are attracted to sailing, so you join the Army. You are attracted to flying, so you join the Air Force. You are attracted to the colour of the uniform, you have family traditions, whatever it is that makes you want to join that force. We have to be aware that that is still going to be a unique entity. I'll be really honest, we have some levels of ambition in terms of gender and diversity of workforce, including inclusivity. They're not a target, and they're actually a sensible business model, because you get much better plans, much better challenge, much better delivery if you have a diverse audience. I probably think very similarly to my colleagues who I joined the Navy with 24.5 years ago, because I've done the same stuff as them, done the same courses. What we need to bring more people who think differently. If I am focusing on a level of ambition that is increased, I am not going to do that by just having a computer where you can tap on an app. I am going to have to get out in the community. I'm going to have to persuade all of you that your sons, daughters, your grandchildren, it's a good thing for them to do to join the Royal Navy. That's not going to happen with a few adverts. You might not trust me with them. I also think we need to explain the difference between the services. And that again comes with us engaging. But I do genuinely think for some cadres, I've spoken to a number of people tonight who are in the digital workforce, cyber workforce. Those are the same skills, whatever colour uniform you want. You might not want to be in the Navy if you get seasick, and you might not want to be in the Army if you don't like camping. But ultimately, the skills are the same. So we have to do better at attracting them for the good of defence, rather than just for the individual service. The other thing we need to do is be cleverer. So we need to be really clever. So at the moment, I let people leave the Navy, and unless you fit into a nice reserve branch, I say thank you very much, unless you want to do full-time reserve service. That's madness. Why don't I work out a plan with some of the people in this room that says you'll go and work with them for 3 years, and then we'll have a conversation? Or you can go on a reserve contract that just means when you're interested in doing something with us, Ukraine, a personnel study, whatever your core specialisation is, we bring you back in. We're not flexible enough to do that. My hope with the AFRP is we get the best of it whilst we keep the best of the other things.
Thanks, Jude. We're going to go to Paul, who's got a question from online.
Yeah, thanks very much, Scott. Admiral Terry, thank you very much for that. This is actually a personal question. Over the last 2 years, we've obviously seen the massive impact of COVID and what that has had across various sectors and industries. How has it impacted upon the Royal Navy? Clearly, when you're away on a submarine or on a ship, there is an opportunity to, I guess, isolate, but there must have been occasions where that hasn't been as straightforward.
Yeah, so being lucky enough or unlucky enough, depending on your perspective, to be in the COVID cell almost from the word go in Navy Command. It was really interesting because we didn't stop training in the Navy, because we knew when you stop training, you generate a black hole further down the line. And we, in a Navy that is now growing for the first time in a very long time, could not afford to do that. What that meant was we had to have some really interesting discussions about limiting people's freedoms, about how we manage classrooms. It was really good because we got laptops that we hadn't had before, and we went on to some virtual training, which would have taken decades to get to otherwise. But it wasn't so simple with our seagoing units. And if I go back to the continuous at sea deterrent, how do you protect that? The way Faslane protected it was they closed everything down. So you couldn't visit, you couldn't come in and out. What it also meant was that the crew for the boat that was due to go on patrol were isolating and living on board that boat. That's a whole different world when you're alongside. Yes, they're used to it when they go under the water and when they deploy, but that's not what is expected when you're alongside. Our ships, again, really interesting. How do you isolate on a Type 23 frigate where you live in a mess deck with 30 people? You can't. And we had a lot of tense conversations with town trying to explain about how our operating model made it slightly harder. I don't think it's any different to the conversations the Army and the RAF were having. It's just we were coming at it from slightly different angles. Ultimately, our aim was to make sure we delivered operational capability. So that meant we prioritised vaccines. We prioritised the ships that were deploying. So Carrier Strike Group 21 were all vaccinated before they went. That's a heck of a logistics endeavour. There's also a few people on there who didn't want to have their jabs or who couldn't have their jabs. So that meant a lot of short notice moves of people to go on a 7.5-month deployment, which was tagged as go and see the world. And they did see the world, but they saw it from the sea rather than from ashore. So we maintained all our operational capability. We learned an awful lot about prioritisation. And what we probably did was put quite a lot of pressure on some of our more senior people in ships and seagoing units and squadrons and commando units. The junior people probably didn't really know any different. That's not meant patronisingly, it's just that's the first thing that they happened. We also had a bit of an issue in our training establishments. Training was really easy because you could just make a cohort. So you made a bubble out of the cohort, which is really simple to do. But of course, what it meant was that the training pipeline was slightly longer than it would have been normally because you'd had to reduce the volume of people going through. You couldn't necessarily get them to join the ships to get their sea training. And so there were some pluses and there were some minuses. Overall, being on a ship is relatively straightforward once you've got it off the wall, because you are in your own bubble. But then the difficulty of going ashore and how you manage that. The hardest conversation I had was explaining to someone in a phase 1 training establishment that while the rest of the UK had opened up, that did not mean the same for my training establishment. And we were locking them down in order to protect training. That takes quite a lot of convincing when everybody else is going to the pub down the road because the pubs are open.
Okay. Any more questions from the room? Oh, we've got a couple. Oh, we've got loads here. Start with Dominic and then move back.
Thank you. Admiral, you mentioned earlier in your talk to us the challenges of hybrid working and putting crews on vessels. While short term you have a problem trying to crack that nut, so I'm not going to offer you a suggestion, but longer term, do you not have, does technology not deliver you a challenge and a solution? Because with autonomous vehicles, vessels and aircraft, then what is the need for crews in future?
So that's a really interesting question. And one of the conversations we've been having at length, there seems to be an assumption that uncrewed anything means no people. Actually, it just means different people with different skill sets. So we might find ourselves commanding ships from a jetty, a bit like happens with Reaper or any of the uncrewed air systems. But the chances are you'll still need engineers in order to keep the longevity of that platform. If you need engineers who are living, breathing people, you're going to need someone to feed them and to clothe them. And so actually what you find yourself in is you find yourself currently, particularly with the technology currently, you can do a lot of uncrewed. But the distance they can travel, the time they can stay out, all of those things doesn't mean you don't ever have to have people. You also might find yourself just needing more people shoreside in order to provide the engineering support when they come back in. The other thing with uncrewed anything is that the aim is you're trying to get as much data and as much intelligence as you possibly can. That's one of the perks. But of course, someone then has to process that data and intelligence, because otherwise it is just information that you have done nothing with. And so I think uncrewed presents all sorts of fabulous opportunities. And as a logistics officer, it's brilliant to think that we might have uncrewed air systems that can help us with our maritime inter-theatre lift. So taking stores from one place to another, which currently I have to rely on boats or helicopters or all those things for, all of which are actually warfighting technology rather than supposed to be being the logistics tail. That's really exciting, but I don't believe we will ever have no people. I just think they're different skills, which is one of the reasons I'm really keen to look at 2040 and beyond to really understand what it is we want.
You mentioned families quite a few times. Obviously, I'd just like to touch on that. I was an army wife for 21 years until my husband passed away. I'm now an army widow, and I literally followed my husband all around the world. I wanted to know whether or not you think that the Navy do things differently in support of families, because obviously it is quite a, moving around to different things like that. It is quite particularly challenging. Do the Navy do that differently? Do they do it better? And if they don't, do you have a vision going forward for how they can do it better?
So the Navy has become more of a service, and has been more routinely a service where your family stay in a location, and therefore the support, the schools, the environment where you are tends to be more what Navy families have done. And they've done that because when I was little, my mum would move into married quarter and my dad would have already gone to sea, and then she'd be in the married quarter with nobody around her, and 9 months later my dad would come back. That's not great in terms of support. So we have always had a slightly different model to the army. That doesn't mean there aren't people who move. And because we link continuity of education for children with moving, there is a real tension there. Because actually you can get access to some really good schooling if you move, but then you don't necessarily see your children as much. And it's a really difficult question. I'm going to be really honest, we haven't done it very well. And I don't think we as a service, as a force, do it very well. So I am acutely aware that I have people from Land's End to John O'Groats and abroad and everywhere else. What I am trying to do is work with the other services. So I was talking to a lady yesterday whose husband was away. She's in York. She's been in York forever. He's left now after 44 years. They've built their own house. The house was late, COVID, so they were living in a married quarter. She was fighting with the married quarters people, and she was fighting with her daughter in a school. And because she's in York, who does she go to? Because we're in Portsmouth, Baslane, wherever. Now, my vision is that that's ridiculous. We should have been able to put her in touch with mainly the army, probably around York, but you know, there is Leaming, there is that. Why are we not able to connect those dots and provide them some support? So I think we do it differently. I'm not sure it's better, but you will be pleased to hear that my opposite numbers and I all agree we need to do it differently and better together. And we in the Navy are working really closely with the Royal Navy Royal Marines Charity and other charities, but the Royal Navy Royal Marines Charity is kind of cohering all the effort. Because again, there's an element in here, I provide the welfare services for the Navy, but I can't know everything about everywhere. The team can't know everything about everywhere unless you've got connections. So why aren't we making better use of that organisation and how we connect through relationships and other organisations? So a bit of a waffly answer, we do it differently. And I think in some areas we do it better, in other areas we don't. And I think we just need to acknowledge that it's a thing. And I think I would stand here today and say to you, we talk a lot about families, a bit like we talk a lot about the whole force, including everybody, whether you're civil service contractor. I'm not sure we have delivered on our promises, and we are all adamant that we need to do better. The key is how you find the resource, and by resource I don't mean money, I mean time and people to try and deliver it for you.
I think there's another one on table 3.
Thank you for a very interesting presentation. In relation to your role, what keeps you up at night, and has that changed in the last 6 weeks?
So it hasn't changed in the last 6 weeks. So I firmly believe that our soldiers, or Marine civil servants at RFA are all absolutely trained to the best we can do currently. We've got a big training modernisation programme which will make it better. But I absolutely believe that our service people are trained to the best we can be, and therefore we are trained for everything from humanitarian aid and disaster relief to full-end war fighting. What keeps me awake is I worry that we focus too much on kit. And the reason we focus too much on kit is because that's where our taxpayers' money goes. It's really obvious to see when it goes wrong. And you wouldn't want to be in army procurement at the moment, and you probably wouldn't have wanted to be in Navy procurement during the carriers. But my worry is we focus so much on that, we forget that the people are the thing that gives you the capability. And we forget that at our peril. Coming back to your point, Dom, about the balance between uncrewed, etc. The people who fix it are still the people who fix it, unless you're going to throw away everything. And I'm not sure the NAO would let us throw away every uncrewed system that we've got. So the inability to see beyond kit keeps me awake. The inability to really be able to deliver on my promise, our promise that we are a Navy family and we want to look after the Navy family as part of that. That's really hard, because how do you quantify the value of that? In a world where we are driven by cost, how do you quantify the ability of helping you move around, giving you something when you turn up somewhere where there's nobody else? And that's the bit I'm getting my team after. We need to do some measures of effect. We need to do some proper measures of effect, not just a really nice note from the CO that says, wasn't that adventurous training package fabulous? Because that isn't going to help me in a balanced investment decision. In terms of the last 6 weeks, I was lucky enough to go to higher command and staff course, which Russ alluded to. And during that time, we did some studies I wrote an essay on Russia. And I'm not the brightest person in the world, but we probably could have, my essay was probably not far off where we are now. I think, if I'm honest, part of the problem is we've all been focused on Brexit, and we've been focused on other things, quite rightly so. And COVID, how do you defend yourself against COVID and a pandemic? I don't think much has changed in the calculus. I think it is now a bit closer to home than it was previously. And it's one of the perks about being in a global connected environment. You just have to understand it.
Thanks, Jude. We've got time for one more, which I think we're going to go on. Cool.
Yeah, this is actually just a comment from Maria at the National Museum of Wales, who said, thank you very much for a most enlightening discussion. She's proud to say that the National Museum of Wales has signed up to the covenant and now looking at nominating the museum for the Defence Employer Recognition Scheme Silver Awards.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. And I am acutely aware that I need to do more to make that people aware of that and to engage with that. So yeah, I'm sure will be able to help out some of that. But thank you, Maria.
I'm not seeing any more hands. I think we're pretty much up the time anyway. So, Jude, thank you very much for that. And I'm now going to ask Guy Clark to offer a vote of thanks. So, guys, let's do a quick round of applause. So Guy will be known to many of you. He's an ex-secretary of our club, but also our FCA as well. So, Guy.
Ladies and gentlemen, the chairman in his initial introduction thanked and commended the RFCA for the series of dinners and events which they've sponsored over the past 15 years or so. And as we were coming in, we had a chat with a well-known retired journalist sitting in the back of the room, who remembered some of the senior officers who have addressed us over the years. And he mentioned the rather scary Mike Jackson, which got me thinking of the smoothly professional David Richards and the somewhat unconventional Alan West. And we've been spoiled again tonight to hear from Admiral Jude, who's delivered a fascinating and articulate insight into not only her own career in the Royal Navy, but how she thinks it's so important to look after her people, the sailors, their families, and others, and thereby, to use her expression, secure the workforce through to 2040. HMS Scott, I too picked up from the Admiral's resume that she had done a tour of duty as a logistics officer on that ship, named, of course, after Captain Robert Falcon Scott, Royal Navy, whose fateful last expedition to Antarctica aboard Terra Nova departed from the then thriving port of Cardiff, which also happens to be the home of the Captain Scott Society, an organization which is established to celebrate Captain Scott, Terra Nova, and the spirit of adventure generally. The Admiral mentioned the fact that it's Swansea, which is affiliated to HMS Scott. I can't see the connection really, and it really should have been Cardiff, which was awarded that honour. It's some consolation that the Captain Scott Society, based here in Cardiff, is affiliated to the ship, but not the city. It's a bit of a tenuous link, that, between the Admiral and Cardiff, but I thought I'd throw it in. Admiral, you've delivered your address with great clarity, and if I may say so, with dignity and aplomb, which is more than one can say about one of your distinguished predecessors as a speaker at this club, in fact, a former Commander-in-Chief Fleet, who concluded his address, returned to his seat, stretched out his legs, placed his arms contentedly across his tummy, only to dramatically disappear from view as his chair toppled over the back of the stage, as you were worried about when we... Yeah, the poor chap disappeared completely from view. Fortunately, he wasn't hurt, and eventually a little head appeared above the back of the stage, and he crawled back on. He did resurface, but any pretense of dignity or aplomb in his performance that night was completely shattered. Admiral, you're clearly a very busy person with a wide and responsible portfolio. We're very grateful to you for taking the time to come to Cardiff to support the RFCA in one of its key roles, which is to sustain a dynamic relationship between the services and business and the third sector, and as part of that visit to address us here tonight. We've, I'm sure, all thoroughly enjoyed hearing from you. Thank you very much, and may we wish you all good fortune as your career progresses, which I'm pretty sure it will. Thank you very much.
Guy, thank you very much for that. That was some good memories that you raised there. I'm just going to conclude with a couple of club matters. The first of which is to remind you that our next event is on the 23rd of May here at the Hilton, where the speaker will be David Howden, who's Chief Executive of the Howden Group Holdings, and Howden's also very kindly agreed to sponsor that event. And then on June the 13th, again here at the Hilton, we have what I think we'll describe as a long-awaited address from the scientific entrepreneur Chris Evans. The event's been kind of affected by COVID a number of times, but Chris is going to actually be here, fingers crossed, in June, so that'll be fantastic. I would also like just to throw out a huge thanks, as always, to our season sponsors, Odgers and Cardiff Metropolitan University. That support is just fundamental to the club, and without their support, we couldn't do what we do. And also, of course, back to the RFCA for sponsoring the seedings event. One other point I just wanted to raise was just to recognise a really long-standing but also incredibly supportive member of the club, and that's Rosie Moriarty-Simmons, who last night took over as High Sheriff of South Glamorgan. So therefore, this is kind of your first real event in your role, and we just wanted to send you our very best wishes for your role. So just to finish, thank you very much for everyone coming again and joining us this evening. It's been a fantastic gathering. I too really enjoyed Jude's address. It's now time to move on to dinner. So if you're not staying for dinner, thank you very much for joining us, and I'll see you all later. Thank you.